let's take this opportunity to discuss what's been said so far with the Straits Times' opinion editor, Grace Ho. So Grace, first of all, to kickstart this discussion, your quick reactions to what has transpired in the debate so far.
Okay, Olivia, there's so much to unpack here. I'm just going to pull a couple of points, which are not entirely related to each other. I think the first very interesting one, which just came out of nowhere, left of field, was the idea of the use of the word weaponized, the weaponizing of Ms. Raeesah Khan's mental health condition. It was something that Pritam Singh raised, but then Desmond Lee said that, well, the word was in the draft of the court report, but not in the final report. So was there a leak? Or was it just, a casual use of a word that just happened to be coincidental? Mr. Lee's view was that it was a very specific term, which may have shown that an earlier version was shared with Mr. Pritam Singh. But Mr. Singh said, no, it was something that was taken from a Rise Media article. So I did a very quick search, and I think it came up with an Instagram post on 4 key takeaways from the case. And Rise Media did use the word weaponizing. But in any case, that's the first point. And the second one was the slew of arguments and counter-arguments, whether or not the COP had relied on sufficient evidence, whether or not it had accepted all the documents that the WP leaders had submitted. And Mr. Desmond Lee's point was that actually a lot of the evidence is contained in the annexes to the report. And Mr. Pritam Singh said, well, but you're relying a lot on contemporaneous evidence, which is evidence that is often collected in the immediate aftermath of a case. And Mr. Lee's response to that was, no, the COP looks not just at contemporaneous evidence, but all the other documents, subsequent evidence as well, that's submitted to the COP. Then I think the larger, the bigger picture issue, I think the observation that came out of this was that in Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's words, the court report is long and detailed, but the core issues are few and stark. So, the public, the media, politicians, we've all scrutinized, Ms. Khan's and the WP leaders' actions. But the larger issue here is also about, a country's values and the politicians' values. I think the phrase used was Raeesah Gate. It was compared to the original Watergate affair about the unexpected stumbling on a cover-up by the WP leaders that might be even more serious than the original transgression, something which the COP did not expect. But the point then was that with the findings before the House, it is now the House's responsibility, the MPs' collective responsibility, to take the necessary course of action. So that's I think some of the key takeaways. There was also Ms. Indrani Raja who reiterated some of the points that were in a sense red flags, that have dogged the case from the very start. If I can just briefly recap here, it's about inconsistencies. It's about things, for example, like, if he had told Ms. Khan to be clear about telling the truth, then she would have no need to text Mr. Singh in the middle of the sitting in October the 4th, right? Or different interpretations of what it means by I will not judge you. Then we've also had, I think, Ms. Indrani highlighting that, the operative phrase which Ms. Khan used about thanking the leaders for guiding her through the incident without judgment, raises questions about exactly what guidance was given, and what was implicit in that, according to Ms. Indrani, was that Ms. Khan had followed the guidance given to her to continue with the lie and the narrative. So I could go on here, but really I think what we are faced with, even at this halfway mark of the debate, is a slew of factuals and counterfactuals, invective and counter-invective, and it's still not clear what the final truth is.
Well, Grace, the debate has gone on for over 2 hours now, so thank you very much for extracting the key points. Let's focus on Mr. Singh's first prepared statement. What's your view on what he said? Did it further clarify his position in this entire saga?
I think it has definitely clarified his position. So I think his main point was that Ms. Khan has demonstrated a propensity to lie both in and out of Parliament, but yet what took centre stage in the court hearings was her own WhatsApp message and her own claim that she had been directed to lie. He also elaborated on 2 points, one personal and one more institutional in nature. The personal one was about a reflection on his own judgment about her admission. So he actually did acknowledge that he should have been more proactive and checked, where she was, her status about her letting her family know about the case and her lie. And that omission, he said, is mine alone. But on the other hand, he also said that his position would be to be sympathetic, with someone who has shared the fact that she has been raped with him, right? And the inclination then for him would be to keep it to a very small group of individuals or himself. Now, the second more institutional point is the selective, or what he thinks is the selective nature with which the COP dealt with the evidence before it. He claimed that there are objective documents submitted to the COP which are not on record, and he rejects the assertion that in raising Ms. Khan's mental health, it was an act of smearing her. He felt that it was relevant because she had, after all, voluntarily shared her own documents showing that she was a patient of a psychotherapist. And in terms of Ms. Loh Pei Ying and Mr. Nathan's representations, his point also, which he reiterated, was that their loyalty to Ms. Khan is an operative consideration, and Ms. Loh's own lack of clarity about the seriousness of what Ms. Khan did. Supposedly there was a quote that it was not on the same level of seriousness as laundering money, might reflect some of the personal inclinations of the witnesses. So there we are, and obviously the facts are still being disputed.
Well, Grace, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong spoke as well. What were his most salient, most important points?
I think what the speech really achieved was bringing all of these technical details back to first principles. He spoke about how to protect norms and values. The quality of a country's democracy hinges on values, and good and functioning democracies have very clear, strong norms. And it's important to uphold these norms, and the right norms can only be upheld by people with the right values. So it was about bringing, I think, the heated debate and the differences in views and distilling them into a common ground. He talked about how, what is the key factor that keeps a virtuous cycle going, that keeps Singapore thriving. It's about calling out wrongs when wrongs are done. It's about preserving the sanctity of institutions, never taking public trust for granted, and never allowing falsehoods to become the accepted norm in politics. So there were a couple of strong words, I think, which will leave an impression in the public's mind. I think one thing that struck me was this part where he said, well, what the WP leaders are really saying is this: don't look too carefully at what we did. Just remember who we are. We are the opposition that you voted for. And by virtue of our position, we should not be referred to the public prosecutor. Any action against us must be politically motivated. This cuts to the heart of what many netizens and WP supporters have been saying over the past few months, which is that the entire hearing is politically motivated, and what comes afterwards is also politically motivated. And his point really was that we need to go back to first principles and see if there has been real wrong committed. This has nothing to do with political motivations.
Well, Grace, looking at the larger picture and what is to come later today, if Parliament votes to refer Mr. Singh and Mr. Faisal to the public prosecutor, what can the public prosecutor uncover and investigate that the Committee of Privileges could not do?
That's right. So we're now still in the middle of the debate, but at the end of it, Parliament has to decide if it accepts the committee's findings and conclusions. It can choose to accept or reject the recommendations or even amend them. The matter will be put to a vote by the House today, and only a simple majority is needed. So if indeed Mr. Singh and Mr. Faisal are referred to the public prosecutor, then a higher bar of proof is needed. So, the police can be directed to collect more evidence, such as email or phone records, and they can have the right to legal counsel, right? And the lawyers on both sides can also cross-examine the witnesses. So, I mean, we're not really talking just about, cross-examining the WP leaders, but potentially Ms. Raeesah Khan herself too. And this process of, discovery and uncovering and cross-examination could take anything between several months to even over a year. Then after the investigations are complete, the public prosecutor has to decide if the case is compelling enough to proceed with the charge. And if Mr. Singh and Mr. Faisal are charged, or anyone else is charged for that matter, then they will get to defend themselves in court.
Well, Grace, of course, the COP has released several reports from the hearings, but what has been proven during those hearings and in those reports, and what has yet to be determined?
Right. So, as mentioned earlier, what the COP has been looking at is contemporaneous evidence, together with written documents, conduct of the parties, whether the evidence given to the committee makes sense even in the first place. The reason why contemporaneous evidence has been bandied about so much here is because in this case there is very little documentation provided by the three WP leaders, although of course this point is disputed by Mr. Singh himself. And so when you have such constraints, the contemporaneous evidence, so like for example, Ms. Khan's WhatsApp message about being asked to take things to her grave, then become quite critical in helping the committee in its deliberations. But it's unlikely that continuing the committee or convening a new committee is going to change things very much, given that there's already so little hard evidence. And so it is important, in a sense, to bring it to the court of law so that more evidence can be uncovered. And that really is the part, where it's yet to be determined how the case will pan out. It's not proven beyond reasonable doubt, that the leaders are guilty. And so now then is setting the stage for the next stage.